So guys, this is my review of the Salomon DRX Bliss. Now the DRX Bliss is a stability daily trainer, and in my colorway especially, this olive green with the white midsole foam and this big orange piece, this is the active chassis. That is the main stability element. It's pretty prominent, right? That's what we're talking about. Let's get into it. My friends, let's start off with some disclosures. Salomon was good enough to send me the DRX Bliss for the purpose of review. However, they're not going to get a chance to see this video before you do on YouTube. So with that, let's get started off with price. The Salomon DRX Bliss will cost you $160. Now, if you've been following along with Salomon over the last couple of years, you know that they have been putting out a lot more road shoes. And over the last couple of years, I've been lucky enough to test several of them. And I've got to say, I'm a big fan. But let's get this review started with some specs. So the Salomon DRX Bliss has 34mm in the heel, 26 in the forefoot for an 8mm drop. Now, Salomon does call this a max cushion shoe, but I don't know. Now that we've got so many shoes out there that increase the stack heights up to 40 and beyond, it seems to me that 34mm and 26mm don't qualify as max cushion anymore. What do you think? Anyway, I suppose that's up for debate, as there are no delineating markers between low cushion, mid cushion, max cushion. I suppose there is a high cushion in there. Anyway, we're getting off topic. Now, the Salomon DRX Bliss does fit true to size. However, it fits true to size for me in Salomon shoes. Now, in a lot of shoes, I do wear a US men's size 13. In Salomon, I wear US men's size 12.5. Now, that's the same size that I wear in Hoka. So while I do think I would fit into a size 13 in Salomon shoes, I find that 12.5 just fits me a little better. Now, while we're talking about sizing, saying something is true to size isn't the be-all and end-all of sizing. Now, in the past, I found that Salomon shoes tend to run fairly narrow. However, I don't think they run as narrow as they used to. I've run in many Salomon shoes over the years, and I tend to remember that they felt a lot narrower than they do today. And especially with the DRX Bliss, I found this to be a fairly roomy toe box, at least by Salomon standards. However, if you do have a wide foot, I'd suggest buying them and trying them on at home before you take them out for a run, just to make sure the fit is spot on. Salomon claims that a US men's size 9 would tip the scale at 9.4 ounces or 266 grams. However, in my size, a US men's size 12.5, it tips the scale at 11.3 ounces or 319 grams. So pretty well weighted, especially considering this is a stability daily trainer. Like, for my size, 319 grams is actually fairly light, and it feels light underfoot. But we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get into the ride section, because there are some other elements of this shoe that perhaps contribute to it feeling lighter than it actually is. Okay, let's start at the top. Let's work our way down. We got a very plush heel collar. Now, the padding is quite biased towards the top of the heel collar, and then as you put your heel in, the space kind of fills out a little bit, and it makes for a very comfortable step-in feel and all-around feel and grip of your heel. Now, that's also to do with the heel counter, which is fairly rigid, but it's not as rigid as you may expect if you're comparing the DRX Bliss with other daily trainers or other stability shoes. There is a little bit of play in here. Now, as we come down just a little bit towards the base, seems to be a lot more rigid around the bottom. And of course, we've got this active chassis system that comes up to the rear of the heel area. It doesn't wrap all the way around, but it is on both sides. And I think that active chassis system on both sides also stabilizes the heel, almost working as a heel clip. But even though the heel counter is not quite as rigid as perhaps some other shoes, I think it is more than enough to keep anybody's heel locked down. I didn't experience any heel slip in this shoe, but for me, that's not surprising. Generally, I don't experience any heel slip unless the shoe has basically no heel counter at all. Now, the upper on the DRX Bliss, it's a fairly thin mesh, and even though it's a fairly thin mesh, it's still kind of like a tight weave. So because of that tight weave, I think it looks less breathable than it really is, but I didn't have any problems with breathability. Even using it to run in my area, which is very hot, especially at this time of year, I didn't experience any overheating in the shoe, and it was overall very comfortable. There are a lot of overlays and underlays, which give the upper just a lot of support. You can see starting at the heel, we've got this kind of TPU overlay that comes down, comes all the way around to the toe. There's an underlay around the toe box. We've got this reinforcement along the eyelet chain, but the reinforcement also comes down slightly into the midfoot area, which is going to contribute to that midfoot lockdown, but it also works in conjunction with the SensiFit system. Now, the SensiFit system that Salomon uses is a series of underlay straps almost. I say straps, that makes them sound thicker than they actually are. They're very thin TPU underlays, and you'll see them on a lot of Salomon shoes just on the midfoot area, which obviously contributes to a superior lockdown. But even though we've got so many overlays, again, back to the weight, the shoe is surprisingly light. This whole upper and lace construction and lace loop just seems very durable. It seems like no matter how much pressure I put when I'm tying these laces, I'm never going to do any damage to the eyelet chain or anything like that. It just seems very well made. The tongue is fairly thick, but at the same time, it's also fairly thin. Now, the tongue is covered in a very light mesh, and it's so light that you can actually see what it's stuffed with. And it's stuffed with a very aerated foam, which when you're touching it, it actually feels quite thin. So I think the tongue looks thicker than it actually is. And clearly Salomon is onto something here. They've used this style tongue in a lot of their shoes, and it really just works. It's going to save a lot of weight just because it is so aerated, but at least for me, it gives the protection I need. I don't have any lace bite in this shoe or any other Salomon shoe. Now, the tongue on the DRX Bliss is not gusseted. It does have a big lace loop here in the middle. I didn't experience any tongue migration. There was nothing sliding around. Once I locked it down, everything stayed exactly where it should be. With that said, I do have a primary complaint about the DRX Bliss, and that's the laces. Now on the surface, there's nothing inherently wrong with these laces. They look good, they feel good, they pull nicely through the eyelet chains, but you know what? They're just a little slippery. Now I didn't run into any problems when I was actually running. They're not slippery enough where they automatically come untied when I just keep running and jostling them. I didn't experience them coming untied once. But where I did notice a problem was when it came time to actually tie my laces. Because they're so slippery, when I was like this and I'm trying to tie a bow, you know how you kind of pull them tight and then you work the laces through like this. I found that when my foot was inside the shoe, it created just that little bit of pressure. So when I pulled them, unless I made an extra effort to hold the laces taut while I tied the bow, the laces would slip through the eyelet chain just a little bit, making them looser than I had originally intended. Is that a big problem? Well, no, because you realize it right away. It's not something that works loose over time. As soon as you're putting the shoes on and you're tying them down, you feel that slip instantly. So you know you have to do something slightly different than you usually do to tie the laces and get a good lockdown. But once you figure that out, you're good to go. When I did take those extra 2 or 3 seconds to tie my laces, I was good to go for the whole run. All right, moving down to the midsole, Salomon is using their Energy Foam. Now Salomon's Energy Foam is the foam they're using in most of their running shoes. It's an EVA OBC blend, and it's a very good foam. It's definitely not plush. It's not the soft ride that you might expect from a shoe with 36 in the heel, but it still feels protective. And because the foam is slightly firmer, it makes you feel like you can pick up the pace, like it's wanting to go a little faster than a shoe like this is designed for. I've had the same initial experience running in the DRX Bliss as I have in my previous Salomon road shoes that I've reviewed this summer. And that is my initial run feels quite firm. But I think that's mainly because I test a lot of running shoes and a lot of running shoes are very soft. So when I run in something slightly firmer, it's immediately noticeable to me. However, the Energy Foam in the Salomon shoes are something that I get used to very quickly. And the thought of the foam being firm quickly leaves my mind, and I always find it a very pleasing running experience. All right, now let's talk about the big orange elephant in the room. This is the Active Chassis. And guys, I'll be honest with you, I don't know much about the Active Chassis. And by that, I mean, I don't know how big it is through the midfoot. I don't know if there are pieces that cross from side to side. I don't know if it's all one piece. I tend to think not. What I imagine Salomon is doing with the Active Chassis is creating rails that run down the side of the shoe just to provide that little bit of guidance. And you can see right here at the back, the Active Chassis comes up and covers the heel bit of the upper. And this is all just a superficial bit of it because when you put your finger in, you can feel that your finger is going down further than the Active Chassis. Now the Active Chassis is it's a firmer foam. It's firmer than the Energy Foam. And just to give you an idea of how firm it is, let's use the durometer and we can just compare some numbers. If I put this on the Energy Foam first, I'm getting a reading of 36 for the Energy Foam. Let me just try up here in the forefoot. It's a little higher, 39 in the forefoot. And then when I put it on the Active Chassis, let's see. Oh, it's jumped right up. 65. 65 for the Active Chassis. Let's try at the front. 62 in the front. And just for comparison's sake, let me try on the outsole rubber right here. And we've got 58 for the outsole rubber. So basically this Active Chassis is firmer than the outsole rubber. That's just to give you an idea of the type of guidance that you've got. And I think if you require a bit of stability in your running shoes, I think this Active Chassis is going to work very well for you. And then we've already talked about the outsole rubber. We can see Salomon is using like a perimeter style. There's outsole rubber all the way around the outside. It's Salomon's Contra Grip rubber, which I've got to say I don't have any complaints with. It is very grippy. And there is quite a bit of outsole rubber here. So I think durability is going to be on the higher end. Something on the outsole that I do want to draw your attention to is the shape of the base of the shoe. You notice down at the bottom here, we've got this squared off bottom. Honestly, I haven't seen this style in any running shoe before. And I think perhaps if you have a little instability in your heel, this is going to work nicely for you. But for me and my running style, because I don't require a stability shoe, although saying that, I do appreciate a little stability in my shoe. But because I don't require it, I did feel that when I touch down on my lateral heel edge, it just feels, I say clunky sounds too rough of a word, but for lack of a better word, it did feel just a little bit clunky. And I think that's because on most shoes that I usually run in, we have kind of like a crash pad at the back and it's a little bit segmented from the rest of the shoe. So it adds a little bit of flexibility. Now because Salomon has this squared off end, it doesn't have the same flexibility. In fact, if we do, let me hold this up for you. If we do a twist test, we can really see how rigid it is. And if I try and bend it here, I mean, yeah, it's not very flexible at all. In fact, I've had carbon fiber plates that are more flexible than this. So I think that's the firmer foam of the Active Chassis that is really keeping everything in place, which is exactly what you want when you're looking for a little stability in a running shoe. If you need stability and you have a very flexible running shoe, it's not going to be doing you any favors. Now, if you are a neutral runner, or perhaps you just need a little bit of stability, I think this shoe could still work well for you. And my favorite part of the shoe is actually the blend of the Active Chassis with the Energy Foam. I did enjoy how firm this ride was when it came time to just run a little faster than my recovery pace. Now, for me at least, when I am running at a recovery pace, I prefer a softer ride. I want something to just feel plush, feel cush underfoot. But if I'm just going out for my normal runs, I do want something just a little firmer. And then when it comes time to pick up the pace, this feels remarkably better than a shoe that is overly plush. And even though when we look at it like this, there doesn't seem to be too much of a rocker, there is very minimal toe spring here. I think where we see this active chassis kind of drop down just a little bit, that helps to create a little bit more of a rocker feel. And I think the active chassis actually contributes to a nice heel to toe transition. Now this may or may not surprise you, but I actually took this shoe out for a tempo run. And moving forward, I will not be using this shoe for tempo runs, but in my testing, I did want to know how it felt when I really picked up the pace. And I got to say I liked it. This is not a tempo shoe. If you're looking for a tempo shoe or a shoe to run fast in, I don't recommend the DRX Bliss, but how everything felt, the airy upper, the firm midsole foam, and I imagine the stability of the active chassis actually made it feel pretty good when I was running fast. But I really shouldn't be talking about that because that isn't what you're going to be using this shoe for. This is a daily trainer for someone that wants a little bit more road feel or at least a firmer ride and that needs a little guidance in their stride. As far as the price goes, I think $160 is probably on the upper end of the spectrum for stability daily trainers. But saying that, I can really see how this is going to appeal to a certain person who needs a little stability but wants a firmer ride. I think Salomon's actually done pretty good with their first iteration of a stability daily trainer. Alright guys, I want to hear from you. Do you run in a stability focused daily trainer? If so, what do you run in? Oh, if you are also a neutral runner, do you ever choose a stability shoe just because sometimes it's a little more comfortable? Let me know. And with that, my name's Matt B. This has been my review of the Salomon DRX Bliss. Be kind, be happy, run well. I'll see you in a couple of days.